Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So, I was on our guest's podcast yesterday. We had so much fun in that conversation that makes it particularly exciting for me to then bring her on the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. But there's not just for the sake of having fun, there's another bigger reason for it. And I'm going to start with a story. So, many years ago, when one of our clients was telling me that they had been sending text messages, reaching out to different prospects and whatnot. And he sent a text message to the wrong person who then turned around and filed the lawsuit. And it ended up costing him many, many, many of tens of thousands of dollars. I've heard many other situations where people have been doing advertising, running on sites like Google, Facebook. They didn't have the necessary disclaimers. And as a result, their accounts got suspended from advertising on those platforms. I know of other situations where companies are collecting email addresses. They didn't put privacy statements, didn't even think to have the privacy statements on the bottom of their website. And there are those people out there that will just crawl different websites looking for people who aren't complying, file a lawsuit, but just for the sake of it, just to cause problems and get that done. There's so many other issues. We have people taking images from Google and putting them in their blog posts and so forth. Those are some obvious, and then there's some unobvious legal things could be inadvertently getting you in trouble. So that's why I really wanted to bring Heather Pearce Campbell on this podcast. Now, she's a self professed warrior mama, nature lover. She's a dedicated attorney and legal coach for 7 and 8 figure CEOs, a mom of two little kids, founder of Pearce Law Firm, which is home to her legal practice. She's a creator of the legal website Warrior, an online business that provides brand protection, legal education, and support information to whether it's experts, coaches, consultants, educators, speakers, authors, you name it, all around the US and the world. There's a lot that we can go into, but you can also get more of her information on her podcast, Guts, Grits, and Great Business podcast. But I really want to dive into today's conversation. So without further ado, Heather Pearce Campbell, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's really good to see you again. I have been looking forward to our conversation on my podcast for quite a while, so I'm super happy to be here with you today again.
So when I started this podcast, we talked about all some obvious, some unobvious legal issues that a number of 7 and 8 figure CEOs could be getting themselves into. So what are some of those, if you were going to kind of like do a legal audit of somebody's website, and what are some of the things that you see all the time that people aren't doing that they should be doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a pretty standard list. I can say that there's very few surprises in this bucket, right? And it's funny because people often think like, oh, it's like opening Pandora's box, which is why I don't want to look in it, right? It's really not. There's a map to all of this. And so if I'm doing an audit, particularly of somebody who's got an online business, even if it's a robust business, there are usually gaps. I'm going to look at all of their website documentation. And let's be clear that a lot of businesses don't have any,
You're right.
or what they have is completely inadequate.
Or they cut and pasted from somebody else's website.
That's right. There's a lot. And on that point, by the way, I have to track down infringers all the time of documents that I build for my clients' websites.
Hmm.
People just don't think like, oh, copyright infringement actually applies to legal stuff as well, right? So copying and pasting, there's a couple risks with it. One is you really have no idea what those documents are doing and whether they're adequate for your business. And in most cases, they're not because they weren't built or designed for your business. Even if you take, I've had people cross my path like an initial consultation or something and say, will you look at my website? I think that I'm covered. I've got everything in place, but will you just take a quick look? And I'll be like, you're based in Florida. Did you know that if you have any disputes, you've actually assigned California as the jurisdiction for, and they're like, well, clearly they didn't know because What did they do? They literally just copied and pasted, and they did not review it. They didn't have an attorney create it for their business. So the number of times I've seen that and that it's really gotten people in trouble is significant. The other thing that happens, whether it's terms or even a client service agreement, again, if it wasn't designed for your business, you just don't know from the standpoint of potential pitfalls what could be waiting for you. So generally, I'm doing an audit of their online business, but also the services that they deliver. Where are gaps in those things? Because there's often a lot of gaps. Where I also see problems is in their marketing, right? Statements that they're making that are overly broad, that are inaccurate, right? So there's a whole set of laws called truth in advertising laws, FTC, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the FTC. That's the online watchdog that is, pegged with enforcing these laws, but also watching out for consumers, protecting consumers against fraudulent kind of behaviors that happen online. And there's a lot of those behaviors. And unfortunate part that I see regularly is a lot of people have gone through, we'll just call them, hardcore marketing and sales training, where they're less focused on whether what they're saying is truly authentic to their business, whether it's really, works for them, and they're more like following a protocol or following somebody else's system or saying what they see other people in the marketplace say. That can get people into a lot of trouble, right? So it's looking at their website language, looking at their marketing language, looking at their sales pages.
Testimonials can often get people in trouble.
Absolutely. And the thing you have to understand about testimonials is you cannot have somebody else say something on behalf of your business that you can't say yourself, right? So people will often hide behind a testimonial saying like, oh, well, this person will just share their own experience and make some great claim about me. And the trouble with that is if you do not have proper disclaimers in place saying, this is not a standard result, I cannot guarantee these results. You really are not supposed to say anything about your product or service unless you can guarantee that same outcome for everybody that engages with that product or service. And that's a pretty high bar to meet for most products or services.
I think the most important thing that I want our listeners to understand is that while the odds of you actually getting in trouble are small, the thing is there's still odds. That means that you still actually can get in trouble. And I've just known way too many people that could have very simply avoided any sort of trouble with just, a few simple fixes. And because when you do get in trouble, it's like insurance. We all take insurance out on our homes, our cars, and whatnot, right? And you pay a small premium that could save you hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, right? This is like one of those things, except it's not insurance. You're just having a legal professional just give it a quick audit and say, okay, you know what? This is bulletproof. You're all set. And that's really what I want you to do. I mean, the number of times that I have worked with a client who I know is doing some paid advertising. And the first thing I do is I scroll to the bottom and I'll be like, hey, guess what? You have no legal disclaimers on the bottom of your website. I'm letting you know now so that you don't inadvertently get banned. Just in case there is a manual audit from Google or Meta, whatnot, which they oftentimes do these manual audits, and they look for things like that. And I've known advertisers who have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars a month get suspended because they inadvertently, like, they just didn't even think about it. So it's like, these little things that can just build more robustness into your organization. And that's why I really feel like this conversation is important. And it goes beyond just websites, right? Because there are things that, again, we're doing like AI, ChatGPT, that we seemingly believe could be harmless. But Heather, why don't you talk to me about, or talk to us about how that could actually get you in trouble?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, AI, it's a great topic. It's such an important topic. And most people are missing the legal side of that conversation. Really quick on your point about like a couple things you said. One, it goes just beyond having, website documentation in place. And then also your example of like a small error of overlooking something having pretty big consequences, whether it's getting an ads account shut down or not, getting an app removed from an online store or whatever it is.
Yeah.
What I would like people to consider is that legal, in my view, legal support for small businesses, and even if you're in the range of making millions of dollars a year, you can still be in the small business category, meaning that you're not necessarily like a Google or a Facebook or, one of the businesses making hundreds of millions, billions a year. Legal support done right for small businesses, even robust small businesses, is a system that underlies all your other business systems. So often when I'm looking at legal support, I'm not only looking at, do we have the right terminology and the right documentation and the right pieces in place, but are they functioning correctly? Do you have disclosures showing up in the right place? Do you have constructive notice being achieved in regards to each of your policies? Do you have that being tracked somewhere inside your system? Do you know where things go? Because it's beyond just having the tools, it's utilizing them the right way, right? So again, if you think broadly of your business as a series of different systems, which it really is, legal underlies all of those systems, and it's going to support you in your marketing. It's going to support you in your website build out. It's going to support you in your sales conversations. It's going to support you in the actual technical part of enrolling people into your offer or program or product. It's going to support you in the follow-up of your delivery and the enforcement of business policies that help you run a better business, right? It's going to also support you if a dispute comes up, right? So think of it as something that touches all these other systems in your business, because when done right, it really helps you build a better business. Full stop. That's how legal fits. It's not this thing that is like an afterthought. We're like, oh, we're just it really can help you in the building process of just building a better, more robust business that is going to skip a bunch of those hurdles that slow other businesses down.
And the other part of it is, as entrepreneurs, CEOs, as founders, we got a lot of stress that we're dealing with on a regular basis, right? If there's one thing I don't want us to lose sleep over, I don't want to lose sleep over the potential threat of a dispute. And I even hate that we're having this conversation, because I've found from my experience, most of the disputes are completely frivolous. Completely frivolous. It's just people poking the bear, right? But look, it's a world we live in, and we just want to do it. Now, there are some situations where maybe it's not frivolous, and that, like contracts and whatnot. That's a whole other issue, and a lot of times it's not necessarily frivolous. It's misalignment of expectations.
No, it's huge. What you've just talked about is I have a whole training that I do on how to minimize customer confusion and decrease disputes in your business, because it really is this element of confusion that causes problems. People sign up for something, or they think a situation or a delivery or a service is going to be a certain way, and then it's not. Well, what happened there, right? What were the disclosures that you made in the marketing or sales or enrollment process? What was said on your website? What was said in your email follow-up once they, started the conversation with you? It is a series of conversations, regardless of whether they take place, through your marketing or a real conversation, where as a business owner or, with a team who does these functions for you, you have to sit back and look at, what are each of these touch points I'm having with the marketplace, with a potential client or customer, all the way through that client journey, all the way to the end of the process, whatever that is, right? And hopefully you're having a continuing conversation with that customer. But am I being consistent? Am I being clear? Am I saying what I really need to say about what this program delivers or can deliver? What am I saying about the client journey and the client side, and helping my client show up as the kind of client that I want to do business with? I call the dispute resolution strategy really your communication strategy, right? And it starts clear back at the beginning of the process.
I get that. Let's go back to AI for a minute.
Totally. AI is a super fun topic. It's been a hot one for a while now. And, people, if you're listening, you probably have had some experience with AI, or even a variety of experiences with AI, right? And the reality is we've been interacting with AI for a lot longer than even just the recent years and the recent version of the AI conversation. But from a legal perspective, There's some things to be aware of, right? AI, on its best days can make our lives a lot easier, right? There's certain functions and things that AI can help with in our business, in our processes, in a variety of ways depending on what tools you're using. And there are some real pitfalls to be aware of from the standpoint of understanding where AI fits in your overall business strategy. So, both from an IP protection standpoint, right? Because IP is a huge issue when it comes to AI. And you've got two sides of that conversation. One is, and we're seeing it play out right now in the courts, right? There's been litigation after litigation after litigation filed in regards to essentially the use of these large language models. And any AI has been trained on a large language model where permissions were not necessarily given around the data that was used for that initial training. And so there's a lot of legal questions around whether or not the outputs, certain outputs, are infringing. Content creators, business owners, author, that's a great example, right? All of the books that have been uploaded to AI tools. There are some really significant potential infringement scenarios where outputs mimic inputs, and there was not permission for that input to be used to train that model. And so the trick is knowing how you're going to use AI so that you don't violate existing IP that could have registrations on it in the marketplace, right?
Mhm.
As well as how do you not expose your own intellectual property to feed this machine where somebody else benefits from your IP because they go to that model that you've trained on. Now you've trained it with your own information. Now somebody else gets to benefit from your brilliance and your inputs. Like, so many people don't think about, like, oh my gosh, what if somebody else outputted a whole bunch of content that you inputted and then they went and obtained, some registration around a concept? Let's be clear that there's a big controversy right now about whether AI can even be used in any kind of a creation that is worthy of a federal registration, whether it's copyright, patent, trademark. Because technically, for an idea or something to be protectable, it has to be human made, has to have an element of creativity. And we have not had a court in the US yet decide that AI on its own has creativity. Now, could that change? Yes. But so far, the positions of various courts have been clear that if you use AI, so one of the conversations I see regularly are all these book coaches about, like, I'll train you how to write your book using AI. And I'm just like, couple things. If you're in the thought leadership game, which so many of my clients are, they're experts. They've built up a body of work. They've done something really meaningful, which is why they're now building a business around, right, delivering that service, delivering that information, delivering that transformation to their clients. Don't outsource your thought leadership to an AI. It just is not a fit for a lot of reasons. And people, it's not really the best way to utilize AI, regardless, right? And then be very careful about whether you're giving any AI tool your core content, your core elements that are really unique to you. Because soon as you've put them into a language model that is generating outputs for other people, you've lost control over that. And courts are also clear on that, which is why some of the big companies really early on immediately came down with policies that, like, across the board, their employees could not use AI tools in the context of work. If you expose, internal data from inside a company that normally would be a trade secret or protectable IP, and you then input it into an AI tool, you've lost ownership over it. You've lost the protectability of that data or that trade secret or that IP.
Sure. We're not saying don't use AI because it's important to understand that the advantages of different companies today, a lot of those companies who are having huge breakthroughs in speed and increasing profitability and deliverability and all this other type stuff, execution, is all because they know how to leverage AI correctly. What we're talking about here is when or if you use AI to make sure that you're doing it intelligently. If you're going to upload a bunch of client documents or feed, client information, to AI, that can be a violation of privacy and that can get you in trouble. And a lot of people I know will do stuff like that as a way to shortcut the process. But that's, again, that is something that they have to be careful for. And that's really what we're talking about.
Totally. And there's a quick list that I can run people through of things to do if you're using AI in your business so that you are crossing some of these T's and dotting the I's in a way that will give you better protection than if you don't do these items. So, for example, if you're using AI in your business, you need to update your privacy policies to disclose that, right? To let people know what might be subject to disclosure using an AI tool or program. You also obviously need to continue to comply with privacy regulations, right? So you can't just say, hey, we're going to do all this stuff with your information if that goes against the law. So you have to understand what the rules are to begin with. But then you also want to update your internal business policies to reflect your position on AI and how it can be used in your business. So lots of my clients have small teams or even teams of independent contractors that do certain functions in their business, right? Making sure that you are consistent in your messaging across how do we use AI? What are the acceptable uses? What are the things that we're absolutely not doing with AI tools in order to protect internal customer lists, internal client data, personal information related to our clientele, etc. Right? So making sure that you update those internal policies as well so that your team behaves in a consistent way around AI, right? And then also updating disclaimers. Let's pretend that you are a service organization that provides a certain service to your clients. Your clients are going to need to know, are you using any AI in the delivery of your work? Because one, it subjects them to risk. If you are not in control of the outputs, which none of us are when we go to an AI tool, we cannot guarantee without separately running copyright registration searches and knowing how to search, do technical searches regarding potential infringement scenarios. We actually can't guarantee the output of our work depending on how we use AI. And so you actually need, and this is a recent thing that, maybe state by state, there are requirements about making disclosures in your client service agreements around use of AI so that your clients are aware of that additional layer of risk. Also, vetting on the receiving side of services, vetting your own vendors and third-party suppliers of any services for the same issue. Are you using a vendor in your business that is utilizing AI in a way that you're not aware of or that hasn't been disclosed that brings risk into your business? And this is actually a really common scenario, back to the very start of our conversation around what are the potential pitfalls. One of them is not managing team correctly, where you have an assistant or an independent contractor doing some work for you, and suddenly they create something that has infringed somebody else's copyright, right? This is a big problem. And they're not taking responsibility for it. Like, well, this VA or this web designer did that. No, as a business owner, you're on the hook for that, right? The buck stops with you. And from a legal perspective, you need to be real clear on that. You don't get to offload risk onto your team. That's not how it works. And same goes for any infringements related to AI. So if you've got a service provider or a vendor delivering something to your company that utilizes an AI output and brings risk into your business, you should be aware of that, right?
One of the really important things that I just want to take mention of. So back when I was in college, I went to Babson out in Wellesley, Mass. And one of the attorneys said, look, and one of the professors said, look, as you go out in the real world, I want you to remember this one rule: never skimp on attorneys or accountants. Always hire the best ones that you can have. And frankly, I was like, okay, that's nice. But I left and I hired an accountant that was inexpensive because that's what I thought I could afford. I hired an attorney that was inexpensive, but a lot of people liked him and they said he was great. So I said, okay, no problem. The accountant that I hired, come to find out, as my business continued to grow, I ended up paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes that I didn't have to. And so, I had to go back and spend more money. with a higher qualified accountant. I hired a top firm out in Boston, and then they went through, and then I started, making more money. I spent more money on the service, but made more money in the long run. With the attorneys, that gentleman that I spent, little money. The problem is a lot of those times when you hire those attorneys, they charge a little bit of money and they're like that contractor that shows up to the house that says, "Oh yeah, I could do your roof. I can do your bathroom. I can paint your walls. I can landscape your gardens. I can do it all." And the thing is they might be able to do okay, but they're not going to be master craftsmen. And that's what happened. In this particular case, I'm actually legally bound not to disclose what happens because what ended up happening was this attorney wasn't practicing law the correct way. And as a result, I had to get one of the number one litigators in the entire country to represent me. And let's just say that particular attorney ceased to practice law for a while. And so I learned a quick lesson. Like my attorney now, depending on which attorney I have, it can cost upwards of $1,000 an hour. Now, for some people, they're like, "Oh my gosh!" But you know what? In 1 hour, he got more done than what another attorney would take 6 hours to get done. It's so important to understand that when you're hiring counsel, when you're hiring advice, whether it's coaches, accountants, attorneys, like you name it, hire the best that you can possibly afford. That's the most important lesson that I learned over the course of years. I got so hung up on, well, this guy's charging $200 an hour. Well, I'm just going to go ahead with them. People seem to like him. It's like, no, hire the best you can possibly afford because the results are so, so, so worth it.
Let's get to that question of like, how do you hire the best that you can afford? And because a lot of people, they think like, oh, I know I need a solution for my business. How do I know, right? They think like, well, I need the expertise. I don't have it. So how do I make a decision around who is the right expert for me? So a couple things. One, you have to plan, like to your point about hiring what you can afford versus planning for where you're going. You have to always plan for where you're going,
Yep.
right? What kind of a business are you creating? And work with people that can help you create that. And that includes your legal team, it includes your accountant or your CPA. Because, and I actually wrote a whole article on this, like, how do you choose a CPA that's a fit for your business? Because I've
Mhm.
seen so much craziness. What happens is a lot of people end up hiring too conservatively, or somebody that's like, oh, you don't need to, form the legal entity yet, or you don't need to do this step yet, because they're looking at where they are, not where they're going. Right. And it's like, no, do you want a team that is not only shares your vision that you have because you can describe it to them, but also has worked with other people who are steps ahead of you on that same path? So, one of the other things you can do with any professional is like, who do you work with? Who are the bulk of your clients? What kinds of issues do you help them with to understand? Do they have the expertise that I need for this particular thing? It's a really important question, and people can get so frustrated on this path of trying to find somebody who's the right fit.
And you bring up a good point too. And, as you find the right fit, what I found, and maybe you'll disagree with me, is you're going to know that they're the best if they specialize in something, right? They have to specialize in something. You don't want to go to that attorney that goes, "I cover everything. You're getting a divorce, you're doing an M&A, you're going to close real estate, you want trademark protection, you want online this and that. I do it all." Like you're going to get in trouble. And the same thing, like when I hired my accountant, I hired an accountant that had a specialty in my industry. I hired an accountant because of just the complexities. I own a number of different businesses where they had the ability to say, okay, we have a tax attorney, we have this, we have that, and so forth, right? The same thing when it comes to legal. Like, if online's my issue, I want to deal with somebody who specializes in online law, right? If it's litigation is an issue, I want the number one litigator. If it's real estate, if it's whatever, it's like I want the person who understands this because law isn't something that you just understand in a quick Google search. Like there's so many new laws that are passed almost every single day. there are changes and twists and turns, and it takes a specialist to understand like what's happening and what's being discussed. What are the trends? Like, what are the pitfalls that we have to make sure we're prepared for in the future so you're not caught with your pants down? Because that can be a problem.
No, that's right. And what you've described, so there's a reason that it's called practicing law, just like the practice of medicine. Like there is no arrival point where you know everything about every area of law. That is not how it works. Like in law school, you get trained on basically how to analyze, how to dissect a problem, which, hopefully you've already got some skills in that department if you're attracted to law school in the first place, but how to write, right? How to make an argument. So you're taught some basic skills, but you're not actually taught the law. You get some general frameworks and you understand areas of the law, but you're really taught how to learn and dissect the law. So, what does this mean? Just like in medicine, if you had a problem with your foot, you go to a podiatrist. You don't go to an internal medicine doctor. Same. You don't go to somebody who's a family law expert for your business divorce,
Yep.
right? So it is really important that you do understand it and that you take the time. Part of it is just the willingness to take the time to have the conversations because, one, you want to know that they serve exactly the kind of business that you are and clients in your industry, but also that they are responsive, that they have a personality that you can work with. There's bigger issues in hiring because ultimately you want somebody who, whether it's in kind of a, as needed capacity or quarterly strategy calls or whatever, becomes part of your team. It is the only way to build a true foundation and keep yourself on a trajectory and out of those legal troubles that can really take down a lot of businesses. So, like, as one example, I had a client who was a new client, and we had kind of put this plan in place of like, the stuff that she needed to catch up on. There was a whole bunch of corporate governance because she had moved states and she'd built out team and she needed some updated registrations. She also had a whole online business that needed protection. We're talking all the documents, etc. She had trademarks that needed to be done, copyrights, etc. Well, she ended up in a scenario before that work was done, actually before a lot of it was even started, where somebody hijacked her business from an IP perspective, had access to the insides, took everything out of her business, just made it his own. Yeah, put it into a new set of software that he had access to, took her list. She was an amazing list builder. So we had to suddenly do A, B, C, X, Y, catch up on every single thing that was on that list in order to bring litigation, federal IP litigation in her home state to get this guy to stop, right? And so $60,000 later, that litigation is still underway. She's a small business and it's cost her hundreds of thousands of dollars to that business because of not having access to her list, not being able to launch new products, not being able to continue that forward motion that businesses create for themselves. And so the damage has been really significant to her as a small business owner. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about where if you are steadily working on that foundation and something goes wrong, you're in a much better position, not have to play catch up and do it all at once. And you are way more likely to have proactive protections in place that are going to prevent situations like that from happening.
One of my biggest frustrations, with most professionals, whether it's legal or accounting or just really just most professionals, is that very few people are what you just said, very proactive. Very few of these attorneys are very proactive. What they do is they wait for you to give them a situation. I have a situation where boom, and then they go ahead and then, they take action. But it's like simple things as a small business owner. Unfortunately, so much of this is trial and error. And unless something either happens or fortunately you have a mentor that says, hey, this is what needs to happen. Like we live in a work from home culture where so many people work from home. And I see a lot of CEOs, especially the small businesses, low seven figures, they go, oh, I just hired somebody and they're working from home. And it's great. Now I'm not a lawyer, so I stay out of the advice, but I find out, well, yeah, they're working from home, but they're using their own computer. And it's like, oh, you can get yourself in trouble with that. Like, because let's say they open up a work email, they click on a link, there's phishing or whatever, and there's a virus that goes in the computer and all this other stuff, like that can be an issue. Like there are all these like little things and little pitfalls that that we just have to ultimately be aware of and something that we have to think about.
Right. And this is why, from the standpoint of how you choose your team and your perspective around the role that that team plays. And when I say team, if you're in business all day long, I'm going to tell you that you need an attorney, you need a really strategic CPA, probably need a financial advisor if you plan on doing well. And you also, whether it's consistently or over time, you need a level of coaching, business coaching, personal success coaching, right? But those four
I tend to
people.
agree with you on the business coach element for sure.
Yeah. Right? Right. It's a good one. And often people in the business coaching realm can overlap with some of that person because, it's like this business and personal stuff, So I'm working with a coach right now and we're constantly business, personal, business, personal.
Okay.
Having that outside perspective where you are taking steps and doing it with clarity that you might not otherwise have is really essential. But in that same way, around your legal, your conversation should not be like, oh, just what happened this last quarter or this last year or the decision I made yesterday, right? And so often people are like, oh, oops, I made a decision last week. And, like for example, the number of times I've had clients be like, I signed this agreement with a publisher. And I'm like, why didn't we talk beforehand? And then
Yeah.
you get into the agreement and it's like, whoa, people just it can just happen that way where people tend to put the cart before the horse rather than understanding any decision that I make, whether it's hiring, whether it's launching new IP, a new course, like I should have had a discussion about this last quarter,
Yeah.
right? And this is the advantage of having a relationship with somebody who understands your business is that you can meet on a quarterly basis. And, with all my clients, I'm going to be like, okay, what's your upcoming plan for the next year? What's your big target for the upcoming quarter? What new people are you onboarding or looking for? What programs or services, like what's changing? And there's some regular assessments that we can do to make sure we're a step ahead. If you're launching a new program or you're redesigning your website, we're going to update all your website documentation and do another review of it to make sure that things are covered,
Smart.
right?
No, that's very smart. So I know we're pushing up against a clock. One of my favorite questions that I love to ask our guests. This is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. What would you say is your biggest, best tip for our listeners who want to get their business beyond seven figures?
Stop slogging it out yourself. I see it all the time in my clients' businesses as well. This just taking too long to get the type of supports in place that can help you get there. Like this is not it's not an individual charge up the mountain talking about mountain analogies, right? It's a team effort. And the faster that you can understand how to ask for support, how to look for and get the right support, like you're just going to speed up your whole journey.
I love that. Now, Heather, people want to learn more about you and the work that you do. Where do we send them?
Absolutely. So pop over to my website, just how it sounds, legalwebsitewarrior.com. You can, find all kinds of free resources and good stuff on there. Like you could get hours of training that will change the way you think about your business from a legal perspective. Also, you'll find my podcast on there, Guts, Grit, and Great Business. And your lovely host is going to be there shortly. So we'll have to cross post those conversations. I love spending time there, with brilliant individuals like yourself and other folks who can really come in and talk about how do we do this business journey? How do we build these businesses the right way? So that's a fun place. And then I'm also over on LinkedIn. So of course, you're welcome to find me there. I love connecting with folks on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Fantastic. We covered a lot of good stuff. We talked about some of the common pitfalls 7, 8 figure business owners are having on their website, from legal disclaimers to testimonials, the things you say, all that other fun stuff. Want to make sure that you don't accidentally get yourself in trouble. Again, most of the time, you're going to be completely fine. But, there is a risk. We want to protect yourself against risk because even the most frivolous of claims can cost you tens of thousands of dollars in defense. It's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. Dot your I's, cross your T's. And, we spoke about a whole bunch of other things from AI and just business in general and bringing in the right vendor and so forth. So it's a really good conversation. For some people, it's probably a little hard. right? Little hard to hear, right? And for a lot of people, they might be thinking, oh, that just feels like more money to spend. But it's really about, instead of saying, is it about more money to spend? It's kind of like, I live by the ocean here. And when we go out on the boat, like we put life jackets in the boat. And we put the life jackets in the boat not because we're expecting the boat to sink. We're putting life jackets in the boat as a just because. It's just the nature of business. This is the game, the rules that we play in. So it's like when we go into business, there's certain things that it's like, this is just our foundation. This is what we have to expect to invest in.
Yeah, to your point, because this is a good analogy, the life jackets in the boat. Tell me how much you're going to enjoy that boat ride without the life jackets.
Well, you're always going to be thinking, what if you don't have life
Totally.
jackets?
When it's like hiking up a mountain with nothing in your backpack. What tools are you going to have when things do go wrong? And to your point, like mostly they don't go wrong. Mostly they don't go wrong on massive catastrophic scales, but always any business that is a legitimate business that is growing and building, whether it's team, IP, whatever it is, there will be stuff that goes wrong. And that is just the unfortunate truth, but business is a numbers game, and I tell people if you plan to be good at what you do, and all my clients do, by the way, you got to plan on stuff going wrong because business relies on people. People problems become legal problems.
Yeah.
And that's just the reality of it. So it's not that people are inherently bad, it's just the nature of how things go. And so it's like anything else. Like if you can plan around that, legal is actually not a sunk cost. And people think of it that way. It's a growth strategy.
Yeah.
Like I would really invite you to look at it like you invest in other things in your business. It is a growth strategy, and it's really part of any successful business growth strategy.
Robustness, right? It's about
Yeah.
building
Yeah.
robustness. And that's really what it's
And
all
that
about.
peace of mind.
Well,
Yeah.
it's peace of mind. I've grown up on boats in my whole life, right? In my whole life, there's only ever been one instance where I had to put a life jacket on, right? In my whole life, and I'm on it all the time. The engine failed in one of our boats, and the boat started. We were on one of the rivers with the highest current on the East Coast, and the boat started going over to the pylon. If it hit the pylon, the boat would have split in half. Everybody's in the water, and so forth. So immediately, everybody started. We got to put the life jackets on and whatnot. But having the life jackets actually allowed us focus to deal with the matter at hand. We were able to, flag a boat down. They pulled us out of the way. Like everything was fine. And if we didn't have the life jacket, at that point would be so focused on survival. Like, what are we going to do? Because there's a fear. There's all these like little whirlpools around the pylon that there's this fear of, what could happen. And then the kids, God forbid, the kids, right? The same thing. That's why I use that analogy of the life jacket a lot with having the good legal team and everything else, because should it ever hit the fan, you have a good team. It's like, you know what? They can handle it. I got to continue working on the business. So when you don't have a good team, you start worrying about survival. When you make big, obvious mistakes that are going to get yourself in trouble, you start worrying about survival. If you're going to build a 7-8 figure business, you got to focus on moving forward. You can't be focused on survival.
That's right. And one of my clients on that point exactly, it's just a short quote I'll leave you with. We did a whole bunch of work in his business. He's multiple, 7 figures. And he said at the end of our work, he's like, it feels like I put down like a 50-pound backpack I didn't know I was carrying around.
Oh,
Even without the catastrophe, he was carrying around that weight of knowing he needed to handle that stuff.
that's smart. And on that note, that wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. Again, that's legal website warrior.com. And for more tips, strategies, and information for growing your business faster, more predictably, and less dependent on you, check us out at predictableprofits.com. Again, that's predictableprofits.com. This is Charles Cadet with my friend Heather Pearce Campbell, and I will see you in another episode.